Uh, Dr. Sandra Graham-Bermann is a professor of psychology and psychiatry at the University of Michigan. As director of the Child Violence and Trauma Lab, she studies resilient coping and behavioral and emotional adjustment of women and children, as well as interventions designed to assist them. Over 30 years, she has developed measures of children's fears and worries and traumatic stress, attitudes, and beliefs about violence, family stereotyping, and conflict in sibling relationships. In addition to longitudinal studies of Head Start preschool children, she has designed and evaluated interventions for women and children exposed to domestic violence using randomized controlled trials. These interventions have been adapted for use with Spanish-speaking women and children, Alaska Native and Alaskan Indian women and children, and Swedish families who experience intimate partner violence. With great support from their effectiveness in enhancing well-being and reducing psychopathology. The programs are now used in 38 states and 4 countries, and I believe that list has grown since I last introduced Sandy, so she can update us on that. Dr. Graham-Bermann received the APA Florence Halpern Award for Distinguished Professional Contributions to Clinical Psychology, the APA Nicholas Hobbs Award for Outstanding Research Contributions, as well as an honorary doctorate from the School of Law, Psychology, and Social Work at Örebro University in Sweden. So thank you again, Sandy, for joining us today. I will pass over the mic to you.
Thank you, and welcome to all of you. It's so exciting to see so many names. I don't see any pictures and I have no idea what you do, but I am just delighted that there are this many people interested in hearing about this issue, how violence affects kids, how trauma plays into that, and also what we can do to help. But thank you, Diana, for that wonderful introduction. Much appreciated. When I give talks, I use PowerPoint slides, and we have some cool videos I think are going to help illustrate the issues. But again, this is material that is upsetting, it's traumatic. People have been through so much, and we have, one way of learning is to hear about it and to hear their stories. But also we are hoping that we can come away with a sense of urgency about how serious this problem is, how common it is, and some sense of what we can do to help. So let me get started. I'm going to try to share my screen. Hopefully this is going to work out great, right? We'll see. Okay, this is the first one. I have to get into the presentation mode. Okay. Slideshow, start from the beginning. Okay, if there's a reason that you can't see these slides, you should be able to see them and see the cursor moving around here for pointing out, highlighting certain things. And I just want to start out again by welcoming everyone. It's great to have the opportunity to share a lot of information with people who really care about this issue. So I hope we're going to have a great day, and looking forward to hearing about the survivors panel coming up in the afternoon. Okay, let's see how I move it forward. It's not moving. Shoot. Oh, give me a second to figure this out. Okay, I think I have to click it. All right, so I started when I was in training to be a psychologist. I did a lot of clinical work and research focused on family relationships and looking at whole families together. And one of the things that really struck me was how much violence there was in families. I also wanted to learn a little bit more about domestic violence, because that was a very common feature for so many of the families in my training. So I went to Safe House Center, which is in Ann Arbor next to Ypsilanti here in Michigan, to volunteer. And the director said, well, you have a PhD, you can design a program for our kids. I thought, well, I could do that, but I thought I was going to just play with the kids or do the dishes or something. So it turned out to be a community-based intervention. And I started it by talking to the women and talking to the kids in focus groups, trying to figure out what were the issues for them. You know, what is it that was upsetting? What did they need? What weren't they getting? What would help? And so the research that I do starts with people. We bring it back to the university to study something, but then we translate it right back to the community with interventions that are designed to address the very things that we've been doing the research on. So it's evidence-based research. And when I designed these programs starting at Safe House, I wanted to see if they were really working. So I wrote a grant to CDC, and amazingly enough, it got funded, and started my research doing clinical trials, trying to figure out if the programs that I've developed work. If so, for whom do they work and what way do they work, compared to people who didn't get the program? So using comparison groups. And then lately there have been cultural adaptations, trying to figure out how do we make this program work for people who are not English speaking, people in different countries. And, you know, my latest phone call is with people working with, you know, Maori families and Aboriginal families in Australia and Native American families in Canada, et cetera. So lots and lots of opportunities to expand. This program's been translated into, you know, all Urdu, among other, you know, languages for people to be able to use. So it's turned out to be something very helpful. The thing that started with the one program, Kids Club, I did then a preschool version and evaluated it. Had the pleasure and joy of going to Alaska to work with Native Alaskan families and Alaskan Indians, learned a huge amount about how to make culturally appropriate groups for kids and women from those different tribes and different backgrounds, basically. Very, very different. Over 150 tribes, separate tribes are in Alaska. I learned so much. I was pretty naive. We did a version for Spanish-speaking Latina women in Brownsville, Texas, and also over the border, and also one with in Sweden, which was amazing to get invited there. We did an 8-year follow-up of the preschool club and a Latina teens group. So this thing that started 30 years ago has really grown into kind of useful information and useful programs that people are using pretty much all over the place. When I went to Sweden, I mean, to Alaska, it was very cool because the capital is in Juneau, working with families in Sitka, Ketchikan, all of these places. We were trying to get people also from Fairbanks who participated. The people in Nome, though, there were only 2,000 people who live in Nome, and only one person was able to do the programs there. And so they decided to wait and maybe try to get connected with closer communities. But in the winter, there's no way to get to Nome. All the roads are gone. And so it's quite isolated. And I learned not every area is going to be able to perform these kinds of services for women and kids. So we need more help, more funding, and more training for people. Brownsville, Texas was done with a woman at the University of Texas. And here she is in the middle, Nora Leando Montalvo, with the staff that I trained there. It was really an amazing experience. And also the Swedish visitors, they came to spend a whole week in Ann Arbor, and I got to meet and get to know them very well. And it was a wonderful thing. The government paid for them to come and paid for the Kids Club and the Moms Empowerment programs to go there in their country. And almost every family going through a divorce gets these programs. So it, you know, all of these evaluations, setting up everything, and kind of all the basic research studies require a lot of people, because we have to create measures, we have to go out and interview and recruit people, then we have to do the programs with them and kind of evaluate them at the end. And we do that so we know if it works, particularly trying to work with all these different groups and different populations. It's important to know if it's still going, is it still good? So again, these are all the different studies that have evidence-based studies 32 dissertations I've chaired, lots of honors theses. And those people with the dissertations, they're now professors and community workers all over the country. So it's been a very satisfying thing. And they're all studying some aspect of violence in the lives of kids. So that's very gratifying. My latest endeavor is a kids empowerment program. It's for all kids, not just those with domestic violence. And it's being done, it started in schools, now it's being done on Zoom. If you can believe, Zoom therapy is a little bit weird, but it's not specific for violence families. Okay. This is my research lab. These are the people at the university who helped me. This woman here is from Ukraine. She spent a postdoc year with me, and I learned more from her, I think, than she did from me. And the programs are now going in Ukraine. So just been amazing, as I said. So anyway, the stuff you're going to hear about next, about how women and kids are affected by intimate partner violence, comes from the work of all these people. Good to give some credit, and the funders, of course, CDC, Department of Health and Human Services, a lot of foundation money, Blue Cross Blue Shield, etc. Trying to stay in the light here, it's hard to do. Okay, so what are the effects of intimate partner violence? The definition, it is including physical violence, and that's anything from pushing and shoving all the way up to being beaten, burned, or choked, or killed. Sexual violence, that's anything from unwanted comments or advances all the way up to being raped, but it can include being coerced into, having sex when you didn't want to. Also, psychological aggression is a big part of power and control. So the idea that people can be insulted or controlled or humiliated, gaslighting occurs. People who are trying to control others use all sorts of means to keep people from feeling like they have choices and to keep them down, ruin self-esteem, etc. So psychological aggression is a very powerful form of violence. And then also stalking, which is all about being followed, being tracked on either with your internet, with credit cards, with showing up at work, unintended, unwanted attention, basically. That is another hallmark of domestic violence. So we're going to call intimate partner violence, which is domestic violence. It means all of these things. So not just the physical violence. That's the thing everybody hears about. That's the thing that makes the paper if someone is dead or if they've been really seriously assaulted. But all of these other things are going on at the same time. How bad is this problem? Well, let's see. About 1 in 3 million in their lifetime report mild violence in their life. And that's 3.6% in the last year. This is not a one-time event. It's not a mild thing. It's a common thing. Severe violence, 1 in 4 women in the United States, and these are national statistics, report experiencing severe violence. That's about 29 million women. So 17% said they've been slammed against something. 14% hit with a fist or something hard. 11% have been beaten up. These are women in their lifetime. At any one time, it's about 2.7% of our population of women experiencing this kind of severe violence. So it's not just a couple of people, it's a lot of people. We asked moms, 221 moms who had been exposed to at least severe physical violence, like being hurt, being beaten, not just pushed or shoved, in the last year, how many times these things happened to them. And there are about 80 questions in this questionnaire. Sexual violence, how much did this happen in the last year? Sexual violence occurred 18 times on average in the last year. How about being injured? And that's anything from bruises to stitches, to hospital visits. 14 times they were injured on average in the last year. Physical violence, 56 times. So those events, I thought it would happen once or twice. They would get out, that would be it. I was very naive. We knew very little about this issue early on. 56 times a year. That's like every week, some other kind of violence is going to happen. Psychological maltreatment, psychological aggression, coercion, that sort of thing, 96 times. That's like twice a week. Okay, so this is a constellation of events. It's not one issue, it's not one time. I want to show you a little bit about, how much kids are exposed to this kind of thing and what it costs for kids. So let's listen to this recording. It's acted, but it gives you the picture. Whoops, I have to get it to go on. Here we go.
Well, I couldn't tell anybody, but I thought if I could just keep things going, it would be okay if I just didn't say anything. When my parents are fighting, I feel lonely, and I want to be with my sister. I just feel kind of left out, lonely, sad. I'm always fighting, and they always talk about my name a lot, so I think it's all my fault. Just listen to me, please. They're always like fighting about me. I get up to see what's happening, but I'm too afraid to know. I'm afraid to see what's happening to Mom and like what Dad's doing. When my mom and my dad are fighting, I don't feel good. I would like to go to my room, and I don't want to listen to the fight. And I always take my best bear with me to bed, and I try to think of something funny and happy. So I creep into my sister's bed, and she helps me to forget about the fight. She helps me not to feel afraid anymore. Well, I always have to be so responsible and take care of my younger brothers and sisters. It's almost like I become mom sometimes when my mom can't do it anymore. It's just like I always have to pretend like there's nothing the matter. I feel sick. Andrea, come on. You know you've missed too much school already. You'll be okay once you get there. Come on. I have to protect my brothers and sisters, because I don't want them to know what's going on. Here you are, Mom. Thanks, hon. I gotta go.
Hon, I need you to stay home today and look after Josie. I'm not really feeling very well.
But Mom, I got a math test today, and it's really important.
Come on, Lynn. With the grades you get, you can afford to miss one test.
It's always one test.
Oh, and would you call the restaurant too and tell Nancy that I won't be in today? I'm off sick.
Okay, Mom. I feel like angry and sad inside. I feel like kicking stuff and like smashing stuff. I hate everybody. Everything. I feel sick to my stomach, and it makes me tired, and I don't really like it. In my happy dreams, I imagine my mom and dad sitting together, laughing and not fighting. They have bright colors on, and we had big breakfast. My dad and my mom were really nice to each other. They weren't fighting.
So one of the questions this leaves us with is, how common is that? Do kids really see what's happening when there's fighting in the family? And we're not saying that women aren't fighting back some of the time. They are, but they are much more likely to be injured or killed. And that's why we focus on women. Men who've been abused also deserve attention and programs, and certainly the violence perpetrators deserve the most attention, in my opinion, to get this problem to stop. But let's look at the effect on the kids right now. So how much did the child witness? Of those 221 moms, their kids were 6 to 12 years old. We said, how much did your child see was physically eyewitness to this or this or this or this? Then we added them up. 87% were eyewitness to these psychological coercion, acts of coercion, trying to get mom to do something she didn't want to do. 85% saw physical threats. And again, if you threaten to do harm to somebody you've already hurt, it's very effective. It's terrifying, it's re-traumatizing, etc. So that's a very powerful thing. And kids have been watching that as well. Sexual violence, they're much less likely to have witnessed. That often occurs in the bedroom. Kids are not in there. 83% of mild physical violence and 77% of very severe violence. And if they're not exactly eyewitness to it, they've heard about it, they've seen in severe violence events, people who come up to help in the house, they know about it. A lot of moms say that their kids just didn't see it, they don't know about it, but the kids always know what's going on. And so we have to assume kids have learned all of these things. They've seen all of these things going on in their house every day, along with the oatmeal in the morning. This is the life of a family. And so they come out with a very difficult issues and difficult ideas about what families are like. And it's very, very, very hard to just settle down and have a normal life when this is the kind of stuff that's going on. And again, being repeated over and over. The physical assaults are one thing, but it's the constant threat, the constant coercion, that whole toxic mix in the environment the kids are growing up with. Okay, let's see if I can move it on. But again, that really depends on the sample too. So depending on how many people having these kinds of issues, how often they occur in the last year, it depends. The shelter samples have the highest rates, as you can see here, of all of these things. Severe violence 27 times in the last year. A sample of people who came for help but lived in the community had less. They had 11 violent events in the last year. People in the community who said they had violence in their relationship had even less. And the comparison group, interestingly, people who said, no, we don't have any violence, but we'll do the interview before and after, we paid people for it. When you ask, did this happen? Did this happen? Did this happen? Actually, they had violence 2 times on average in the last year. And so even if they don't recognize it as intimate partner violence, this severe and mild violence is pretty common. And it's from people from different areas of the community. But the people in shelters, people who come for help, those are the people who have the most dire circumstances. So back to the kids, what else is going on for those kids who are exposed to IPV? Well, we know a lot of them are. 40% have co-occurring child maltreatment. And this is true across about 7 studies that people have done, not just my own work. They're 2.5 times more likely to be physically abused, but 5 times more likely to be sexually abused. And so we have to do some screening with the kids to figure out what else is going on, what other kinds of services they might need. And there's a strong link between intimate partner violence and very aggressive parenting. Overly harsh discipline doesn't rise quite to the level of child abuse, but right on the line there. And so focusing on parenting is very, very important as one of the biggest ways we can help kids too. So how does it affect kids? What is the impact of IPV on kids? Before we get into the impact of it, the effects of it, any questions about the prevalence, the frequency, and the extent of it, and the extent to which kids see it? If Diana has questions that have come up, I will answer or try to.
So far, Sandy, our questions are if you will be sharing the slides with us after the presentation.
That's going to be up to the people who have put on the conference. So I leave that to be decided later. We'll let you know after lunch. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
No, those are all.
Great. Okay, let's go on. Let's figure out, how does this affect kids? Well, a lot. 3 to 5-year-old kids, 60 to 75%. This is in study after study after study. It's not just my work. They're in the clinical range of behavior problems. That means they get a diagnosis. They should be getting mental health services yesterday. The kinds of problems they have, they could be diagnosed with aggression, like conduct disorder, although they're too young for that, but it's aggression, anxiety, social withdrawal, that they're more likely 30 times higher to have this kind of problem than kids not exposed to domestic violence. But they're also socially struggling. They're more likely to be rejected by their peers. They express a lot of negative emotions. They grow up in a house where there's a lot of negative emotion. And they struggle with trying to express emotions because they see very extreme emotions. You know, when people are angry, they're explosive and violent. They're not just mad. When people are sad, they're withdrawn and crying and sobbing. They're not just unhappy. So their emotion regulation is way off. And that is very common in the kids we work with. So they're more likely to be afraid of people, of things that might happen about people in their family. And they have negative ideas about families. They're not happy places. These are not, you know, men's roles are different than women's. This is not, you don't think highly of being in a family. Kids sometimes even blame themselves for what's going on because, you know, like the little kid in the video, I hear my name coming. It must have been something that I did. And so kids tend to take on, you know, the responsibility. And they may think it's okay to hit people, that it's okay to be dominating and insulting, et cetera. And this makes it very hard for them to get along with other people, to get along in school, or even to feel good about themselves. So the kinds of emotional problems, they're more likely to be anxious and fearful, more likely to be depressed, have low self-esteem, and some even have symptoms of post-traumatic stress, which we're going to talk about in a whole separate presentation after this one. But it affects their behavior. It's very hard to pay attention in school and to do well when you're all worried and stressed out. They may be more aggressive. They have social skills deficits. They can't sometimes get along well with other people because they don't know how. They tend to be too aggressive or withdrawn, et cetera. And they may have different or skewed social expectations. Did a whole bunch of studies on traumatized kids, kids traumatized by violence. And we saw, using all sorts of kind of cool, fun experiments, they are more likely to think that people are going to hurt them, people are going to be mean to them, and people are going to be angry compared to kids without this kind of violence. They expect the worst because they've seen the worst, and they're protecting themselves. They're trying to protect themselves against what might be coming. So this is something we have to work on as well. But it depends on the age. We're going to talk a lot more about how trauma affects kids of different ages. But school age kids, for example, they may be lagging academically because they have trouble focusing and paying attention. When you're up all night, hearing your parents have a big fight, it's really hard to just chill out, forget it, and move right on the next day. They can be behind in reading and other academic skills, but some can be very parentified, like the older girl in the movie we just saw. She has to assume the role of the parent in the family. She doesn't get to be a kid, to have fun, to go to school. She's got to take on this job and protect everybody. Sometimes kids are inappropriate about anger, again, lacking social skills. They can't express themselves very well. And those are ways that people manage their feelings, being able to say how they feel, plan to do something different, and move on. And these kids are stuck in a way. When they're older, though, the consequences are even greater. When kids are 13 to 18-year-olds and act out, they could be delinquent. They can get arrested. They may be using drugs or alcohol. Clearly, school performance is suffering. There are studies of this. And that could be related to drug use or the ways they're using to cope, the inappropriate ways. Higher rate of teen pregnancy, they're more risk-taking. There can even be violence in dating relationships. We did a study of high school kids in Flint, Michigan, about many of the high schools there. One of the graduate students found that more than 50% of those relationships, when they were in a dating relationships, had violence in them. And that can be shoving people, slapping. Most of it was mild violence. Interestingly, the girls were just as violent as the boys. And so this idea of growing up in a family with violence and having it replicated in relationships later in your life is a possibility. It's not a one-to-one though. Every kid who grows up in a violent family does not become violent. Being socially disengaged, teenagers just quit, they give up, they drop out. Here's another example of how kids of different ages, particularly a teenager, might be, how the violence might show itself in his family. Get this to work, that would be great. Well, here we go.
Like Dara, I have this kind of self problem. And when my mom compares me to my dad, it really seems to bug me because I guess I'm afraid maybe someday I'll turn out like my dad. Well, I can't stand this. I'm going out. Where are you going? Just downtown, meet the guys.
What are you doing?
I'll need some money.
Jeff, I've only got $10. I can't give you any.
Get some from the machine tomorrow.
We don't have any money. We won't have any until your father gives us some.
Oh, Christ, Mom. Why don't you do something? I mean, Dad beats the hell out of you. Go to a lawyer, for God's sake.
I don't want to talk about it.
Dad's rolling. They'll make him give us money. But no, you just sit there and take it.
Tell me what to do. I'm doing the best I can, Jeff. I'm looking for a job, but it's not easy. If you weren't so selfish and wrapped up in yourself.
Look who's talking. You're the one always bitching away about something. It's not my fault you and Dad fucked up.
Don't you swear at me, Jeff Hagen. Don't swear at me. You sound just like your father.
Wonder Dad left me. I have to pop up with this shit. I'm out of here.
Okay, you can see how in some cases that kids, whoops, hold on, I want to move on. Okay, in some cases, kids emulate the behavior of their parents. Most kids do. We hope they only take the good stuff from us, but obviously they take the whole package. And kids get very frustrated. They can't really understand the role of the survivor in the family and how hard it is and what they have to do and how they may very well want to avoid antagonizing a violent partner who can really cause a lot bigger problems. And so for teenagers, one of the risks, particularly for boys, is that they may get involved in the fighting. They may try to become aggressive themselves. Here's another depiction.
There's still a few problems when I visit my dad, but I really get the feeling that I'm getting stuck in between my mom and my dad. But it must be so bad for my younger brothers and sisters because they must not really understand what's going on.
Hi, how'd it go?
Oh, fine.
So what'd you do?
Oh, we did lots. Dad took us to the park and then we went to the restaurant.
Wow, sounds like a good time. Hey there, buds. Could you please come back here and pick up these things?
I gotta get a drink. You pick it up.
I beg your pardon, Gregory.
When Dad makes a mess, you pick it up.
Greg, now come back here a minute.
Thanks, Andy.
Hey, how about you? Did you have a good day with Dad?
Yeah, we did lots of things. But it wasn't really that good. Dad was kind of tense. At the restaurant, it took a long time for them to bring the food.
So you know how Greg gets.
He started acting up.
Yeah. Dad got really mad and dragged him out to the car. We had to go right away. Dad wouldn't talk to us much then. There's still a few problems when I visit my dad.
Hold on.
There's
Okay, so we can see in these video clips that, you know, even if the mom has been able to survive and leave the abusive relationship, if they are children, very often there's visitation. You can divorce the man, you can't divorce the father of the kids. And so there's a lot of contact and a lot of strain and stress that goes on when during times of visitation that kind of bring back the issues. And the kids are having to deal with all of that still. And so it's not over for kids at a certain point, it goes on. But we find in so many studies that this is a consistent thing, that kids are going to have both of these kinds of issues. I always thought, well, the boys are going to be aggressive and the girls are going to be withdrawn. But no, it's true that they both have high levels, more than people who haven't been exposed to violence, of these kinds of problems. So internalizing things are anxiety and depression. Externalizing things are aggressive, being delinquent, and that sort of thing. So they have trouble with their emotions, they have trouble with peers, and they can expect other people to be aggressive. But are they all like that? Do they all have these problems? That was another question, another study that we wanted to do. And here's what we found out. We looked at all of the problems that kids might have, as well as all of the resilience factors, the coping, how well they were able to have self-esteem and feel competent. And then we did a cluster analysis, which is a fun statistical thing if you're a statistical nerd. And here's what we found. 20%, 24% of the kids had severe problems. That means they were very high in internalizing problems, very high in externalizing problems, and very low in coping and competence and that sort of thing. Again, these are the kids who they get a diagnosis, they should be in therapy yesterday. About 45% though were also struggling. These are a separate group. They're right on the borderline of having a diagnosis with internalizing, externalizing problems. They might have some positive coping and resilience, but not much. We found 11% were just severely depressed. But here's the interesting thing. 20% of the kids, at least at the time that we did this study, were resilient. And that meant they did not have, they have very low levels of these internalizing and externalizing problems, but very high on coping and self-esteem. And we dubbed those kids in a resilient group. And so if you work with these families, you're not going to see kids with the very same issue. They're not all aggressive. They're not all depressed, etc. Some are, some aren't. And some are doing okay. So this is the same thing I just told you. All right. So why is it that these kids are doing, some of them are doing better? This is a big thing. Let's figure out what they're doing and let's get that going for the other kids. Well, there were two aspects of it. Feeling a sense of self-worth, like I am okay, I'm gonna be okay. Having no shame or guilt. So reducing shame and guilt in kids is really, really important to make them feel worthy and to have self-esteem. Feeling competent, there is something I can do in my life. I'm not powerless or helpless. I can do something, and I'm connected to other people, that I have friends, that I feel like I can get along with people, and that other people like me, that this builds a sense of competence and self-worth. And those are the elements we're going to try to bring in to these programs so we can enhance these elements for kids. And those are things that help reduce some of their problems. So they don't all react the same way. It's really important to remember that. Some have serious problems though. Some are struggling. Most of them are struggling. Some are just depressed, but some kids are all right. Okay. Any questions about how the kids are doing? And I can take a pause for a second, see if we have any questions.
Yes, we do have one question, and it says, what does this look like for families who hide the abuse? The abuse happens behind closed doors and is not talked about. The expectation in the family is that they act quote unquote perfect, like nothing is occurring.
Yeah, that's a great question because that is very, very common. I don't know about you, but I grew up in the Scottish and Irish family, and we did not tell anybody what was going on. There's a lot of drinking in my family of origin. We did not talk about it. You do not take your dirty laundry outside of the house. That's how it was put. And I think that's very common. I don't think it's uncommon at all. The issue for kids, though, it's dangerous because they're threatened. If you tell, you don't talk about this, you don't tell anybody what just happened, nothing happened, they won't believe you. Or, don't do that. My dad's going to get arrested if you talk about this. Your dad will get arrested and he'll have to leave and we won't eat, etc. There are all sorts of ways that coercion sort of trickles down onto the kids. They get threatened, they're coerced the same way. Plus, a lot of people are ashamed. Certainly the perpetrator has every reason not to get this story out, in the neighborhood. That said, though, there are plenty of neighborhoods where you can't hide it. You live in an apartment, everybody hears it. The police show up, the ambulance comes, everybody knows what's going on. The question is, can you get help? And by not talking about it, by being forced to not talk about it, that's a way of gaslighting. Like, you can't talk about this, they're going to arrest me. Like, well, yeah, but when you hear that over and over and over, what are the consequences if you do this? The kids know it, and the kids are, coerced as well. So we have to break through this idea that you can't tell anybody, that it's a dirty secret, that, this is something that you can talk about. And kids, this is why these programs are so great for kids. There's no place they can talk about this outside of the family, and their moms don't want to talk about it usually. It's too hard, it's upsetting. And you certainly aren't going to talk about it to the abuser. And so they're kind of stuck. And these programs really try to unstick them in that way, to provide the support and the place where, they can be heard and they can see other kids. Hey, they're just like me. I'm not the only one. This is very, very healing. So great question, and not at all uncommon.
Thank you, Sandy. We do have another one, and it says, what's the best way to gauge the level of danger or effect on the kids when you're only working with or hearing from the parent?
Well, that's a really good question. There is a dangerousness assessment that Jackie Campbell created for use by courts to decide how, what's the risk for the woman in this circumstance. And it's things like, is there a gun in the house? Have you been choked before? That's a big indicator that the person's willing to go too far. Have you been threatened with death? Is the parent not a biological parent of the child? That adds more stress and more danger to the woman. So there are a whole bunch of items on that list, and it's things like that courts use to assess the level of dangerousness in terms of risk to the woman, and you just trickle that right down to risk to the child. So the child's at risk for having their mom being seriously, severely injured or killed when these things are happening. Did she try to leave the relationship? That's a time when it's very common for the violence to escalate. It's the last ditch chance to keep her in, to keep control of her. So there are items like that, red flags that indicate this is a person who is at high risk for being dangerously hurt. All right, pressing on. All right, one of the things I wanted to know, and this is, I hope this isn't too nerdy a talk for everybody, but I was really interested, these kids are getting diagnosed. They're getting a label like anxiety disorder, depressed child, like it's all within the kid and it's not in the environment at all. I wanted to know if they're anxious, what are they anxious about? What is making kids anxious? Because anxiety could be a genetic thing, you know, it could be a neurohormonal thing. It can be treated with medication if the problem is within the person. But what if it isn't? What are kids so scared of and afraid of? That's what I wanted to know. And is it different if they're in a family with domestic violence versus a similar age, gender, you know, demographic group that doesn't have that kind of violence in the family? And I was trying to prove a point here because I didn't believe that they should be given medication. What we found was that kids in the families with domestic violence were more likely to be afraid and worried that their mothers would be harmed and their siblings could be harmed compared to kids who didn't have violence in the family. They were also more worried and afraid that their dads would try to harm some other person compared to kids in families without violence. And the more afraid they were, the more adjustment problems they had. We knew the more afraid they were, they'd have more anxiety, but the more afraid they were, the more aggressive they were. And that was an eye-opener. So they're more anxious than other kids, but they're anxious about the real world. They're not medically anxiety-prone kids. Something's happening that's making them scared. When they're worried, they're more likely to be aggressive too. So when you see working with these kids, you see a very aggressive kid, don't think, oh, what a nasty little kid. Look at that kid can't behave, whatever. This kid is scared. There's a whole different way of treating that problem than just looking at the diagnosis of anxiety. So the Kids Club tries to address this, the whole issue of fears and worries and how to manage anger and how to manage big feelings about those things. Because they're not anxiety disordered children. They are being made anxious by the people in their environment and they're scared. And that's what's driving their mental health problems. So interesting, research can help us in a huge way, but we don't want to make a mistake of drugging up kids when the real problem is what's going on in the family. Okay, another interesting study. So how are they doing physically? Does this have anything to do with the kinds of health problems kids have? And again, it's comparing kids in families with domestic violence to those similar families, but no IPV. And here's what we found. More likely to have asthma. And this is controlling for where they live, SES, income, ethnicity, everything. 4 times more likely to have asthma, allergies. And these are gastrointestinal problems. When you're stressed out, you may have stomach aches, you may get the runs, you may not be able to eat right, etc. And they're more likely to be overweight. And this is what stress does to you. This is what stress does. It activates other physical health problems you have. It dysregulates the cortisol in your system. And that can lead to very severe physical health problems. And this is a problem because these are things, it's not a one-time event. This is ongoing chronic stress, traumatic stress. And so they're going to continue to have these problems as long as they're in the toxic environment. I was shocked at that one. So what about, over the time, longitudinal studies when multiple violence exposures, it happens on and on and on over the years. Clearly, this contributes to anxiety, and we showed you how it does through the fears and worries. It contributes to these physical health complaints. Somatic is body complaints, so severe headaches kids have, nausea, etc., stomach aches. Sorry, it keeps moving. It contributes to academic failure. So these kids, every time there's more violence, different type of violence, domestic violence, child assault, greater risk for depression, 50% greater risk for these other kinds of outcomes due to added exposure. So 1 year of exposure is something, multiply it, and the risk is exponential. So why is it that some kids have greater problems, even though they're all exposed to violence, and some kids don't? How can we try to figure that out? That was another question I had. And luckily with this huge research team, that's just 1 year's worth of students. I have about 17 every year. A lot of people get 3 credits at the University of Michigan for interviewing kids and moms and helping out with the programs. But it's been great. I've been able to do this work because of these people. And of course, all the families who are willing to, come forward and get some help, but also tell their stories. So why do kids react differently? How come they're not all falling apart? Well, there are different risk factors, things that make it worse, and protective factors, things that make the outcome a little bit better. And that's why we know some kids have problems and others don't. And it's things about the individual, the person, but it's things about the family system also on that level. Also, things about the community you live in. That has something to do with whether you're going to have troubles or not. And also living in this country, our society, makes a difference. In some societies, programs are offered for free and provided to everyone. In others, the shelters are closed. When I first started to do this work in the country of Ukraine, it's the biggest country in Middle Europe, biggest landmass, there were 3 shelters for abused women and their families, 3. The way you live definitely matters, and the laws and the funding, all of those things come on the societal, and the values, the patriarchy makes it worse. So I think we have to understand there are things about kids, but things about the violence. Is it just, quote unquote, just domestic violence? That's enough to derail anybody, but also emotional abuse of the child or physical assault, and the violence history. How many partners have been involved? How long has it gone on? That's related to kids' adjustment or their outcomes. So how they're doing socially and emotionally, whether they're traumatized. We're going to hear more about that soon, but also whether they're going to be okay. And all of that has to do with their reactions to the trauma. So how they're handling it is really, really important. But there are things about individuals that make it worse. Young kids do worse. We're going to find out more and exactly how they're affected in their brains and their development in the next segment on trauma. If you are in a family with domestic violence, but your mom is doing better, she's okay, maybe she's not, severely depressed and traumatized, you're going to do better as a child. If you are in a family where there's more stress, you live in a neighborhood with violence right outside the door, with racism everywhere, with no opportunities for jobs, etc., that is going to make it worse for the child, worse for the outcome. It's more stress, more difficulty for everybody. Community violence is another element that contributes to this. It makes it unsafe. It makes it more stressful for everyone in the family. And there are things that could make it better, though. People with more education do better. So parents who have more education, it may not, it's one of the unfair parts of life perhaps, but they're doing better. If you have, their kids are doing better. If you have in a family where the parent is just really, really a great parent, even though, all of this is going on in the family, they get it with kids, they're able to do it somehow. Those kids are going to do better. If the child has social support, like a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, somebody who can help in the family, but also if the mother has social support, she has friends she can count on that she hasn't burned out yet, because these are women who have issues. They don't leave right away. It frustrates their friends. They want to help, but they can't. Having remaining social support is really critical. In a lot of families, they take the side of the abuser. In our family, we don't get divorced, lady. What are you thinking of? Or, he didn't hit the kids, did he? What are you leaving for? So getting support from family who get it, but oftentimes these are families where they have their own troubles, and that's why perhaps they're not able to give more in help. Community resources. If you live on a bus line, you have 5 kids, it's in the winter, and there's some money to get bus tokens, you're going to be better off than somebody who doesn't have that resource. Being able to get medical care is very, very health care, very important. Being in a community that has a shelter that pays, workers a decent wage so that they can keep the shelters going, but community type programs that serve the needs of people in need, people with domestic violence needs. That's why some kids are doing better than others. All of these things. It's not just something about this kid just can't cope, it's not a good coper, or that, this was too much, and it can be too much. And this is the stuff that matters. So the programs are designed. So how do we, reduce these risk factors? How do we get people connected to others? How do we get communities to do more? And how do we enhance the positive or protective factors? Because that's going to matter. In the next presentation, we're going to hear a lot more about, well, what is there about this traumatic stress? What can you do about that? So these are the challenges when we're trying to help kids. They could think that violence is the way to solve troubles. They may have been blamed for the violence, feel guilty. They may have very stereotyped roles, like the dad is supposed to be all powerful. He can be violent. He can the king of the house. The mother is supposed to be very, ineffective. She's really not good at anything because that's what he says all the time. They've learned these really distorted roles. And it's really hard, particularly for boys. When we talk about the family in the future, they really struggle with that, because what does it mean to be a strong man who isn't violent? That's like not there for them. So we have to talk about those things. A lot of kids have been exposed to different kinds of violence. They could be maltreated themselves, but they're worried and afraid. They're worried and afraid. That's another way to think of them. They certainly have trouble with emotion expression. Sometimes they get way too excited. They're way up here. Other times there's kids, sitting under the table. They're so withdrawn. And we have to try to help them express and regulate feelings so that they can cope better with what's happening. Maybe their moms aren't doing well. There's a mom's program, or if it's their dad, a dad's program who could help. And they may have been traumatized. So what we're trying to do in this program, the Kids Club program, we have 10 sessions. It's not everything, but it's maybe a big commitment for a lot of families to come 10 times. Here's the kind of stuff we do. We help kids to feel safe in a group and to become part of a group that is just there for them. There are some rules to the group. We want to create a sense of belonging and a sense of safety. We are talking to everything we do in this program is all about things in general, and then we apply it to the issue of violence. So this session is all about feelings. So what do kids think about feelings? What are feelings kids might have? It's all done in displacement. We don't ask any individual, what happened to you? What do you think? But we use puppets, we use put on plays, we have activities, all designed to get the topic going. So we make posters about feelings, paper plate masks about feelings, feelings charades, all sorts of things. And then what about feelings about violence? How do kids feel when there's violence in the family? The third one is we try to reduce the sense of guilt or shame, because no matter what a child does, no matter how gooey, sticky, horrible, nasty, aggressive they are, nothing they can do where the result should be violence in the family. So it is never their fault. And we want them to know that loud and clear. And this session is designed in different ways to get that message across. The kids really appreciate hearing this. It's never the kid's fault when the parents fight, because there's nothing a kid could do where it's their fault, even though sometimes they get blamed for it inappropriately. And we can talk about that. Now let's get to this feelings and, about frightening things. So what are kids scared of in general? And then what are they scared of when there's fighting in the family? Everybody has fears. We all have things that we're terrified of, things that we're scared of, worried about in the present or the future or whatever. And then there are specific things that kids are afraid of about fighting. And there's things like, I might get hurt. It'll never stop. It gives me a headache. A lot of answers they have. They can talk about this, and that relieves their fear and worry. We can say, yeah, most kids would feel that way. Again, getting rid of that shame and guilt. So there are things about the program that follow from the research that we learn from people in the community. So it's kind of cool that we can do evidence-based, helping, because we've got the evidence, not just my studies, but others. Safety planning is important. So what can a kid do? Where do you go? Can you tell people? How would you do that? We walk through that with them. It's important to talk about gender. Again, those gender roles are really kind of distorted, and how kids think about men and women, boys and girls. What can they be in the future? We talk about families. What is there about families that are really, really the good things? What's the food? What's the cultural stuff, the ethnic stuff? You know, what are the holidays, the celebrations? And what do you want that to be like in the future? And that's giving kids a chance to think of it in a different way. It doesn't have to have violence in the family. And then, you know, problem solving. We have all kinds of cool ways that they can answer questions, like a Dear Abby kind of letter, and they can put on plays about what kids could do instead of fighting, what characters could do, telling stories, etc. We have a workbook the kids use to go through it, and we review that over and over and over, because learning that's, things that are repeated get learned and reinforced. But the whole program is geared to trying to address the things in a safe way, respectful way, getting feedback from group leaders who are not their parent. It's very hard for parents to do this. And then to celebrate the fact that they've come through it, you know, that they participated in this program, they've made it through, and all the kinds of cool things that they did and things they've learned. Kids love this program. It gets very high ratings in terms of satisfaction. They love the group leaders. The activities are fun. Every now and then, they'd rather have a different kind of snack beforehand or whatever. But this goes well. We've even had parents say, you know, if you don't behave tonight, you're not going to kids club, because they really want it. So I've never been involved with a therapeutic program that actually kids can't wait to get to. And this is true, it's fun. We do arts and crafts activities, etc. But typically when there are some kinds of programs to address issues for kids, it's one-on-one, it's not natural for kids, it's not in a group, which kids are much more comfortable with. And we never force a kid to talk about anything, but they do, listen and learn. Even kids without a lot of problems can benefit because it strengthens them. So it's a preventive intervention program. Okay, any questions right now before we talk about how IPV affects the women or their moms?
We did get a really good question in the chat, and it says, when talking about child adjustment in children who experience IPV, was there any trends in children who sided with the abuser versus those who sided with the victim?
That is a great question. I never did directly study that. Like, who do you most identify with? We talk about gender roles in the program. We just assume that it's really hard. We talk about what's your family going to be like in the future. The girls can do this much better. They're more likely to say, well, I know I'm going to have 3 girls and their names are going to be Katie, we did this as kids, right? When I grow up, boys may know what kind of car they want to have. Very few kids talk about the job they want, but we try to talk about that too. But boys struggle with what it's going to be like in the family because their role models are not ones that they want. They love their dad, but they hate the behavior. They love their mom, but they might be mad at their mom for not leaving. There's all sorts of mixed emotions and ambivalence, but it's really hard for boys when it comes to family and role models because, they are men. They're going to be men. They're boys and teenagers. They do identify, at least they look to their dads. So we try to sort out, how can you be a good dad or a good husband, good parent in a family without being violent? Because you can be. You can be. Most families don't have this going on. And that's sometimes news because for the kids, this is the way it is. They don't know other stories. They're starting to see it perhaps in other families. So they do get stuck, but this percent of kids who actually more strongly identify with one or the other, I don't have that, but that's a great study if somebody wants to do it. Okay.
We do have another question, Sandy, and it says, how can therapists get trained in the Kids Club program?
Well, there is a training program. There are training manuals that go over each and every session and the research behind it and why and how you can try to get these issues across for kids and for their moms. And there is a training program. You can email me. I'll leave my email at the end. I can give you more information about it. You can be trained, like in a session like this, only how to set it up, how to do every session. But also there is a DVD with 6 sessions in it that shows all of the elements of how to set up the programs, how to do them kind of week by week by week, how to evaluate them and all that. So there's plenty of information on this, and I will send you my email at the end. So let me know. I'm not coming to Nebraska, but it's easy this way by Zoom. So, you know, everyone hates Zoom times, but it's worked great for this program. I've been Zooming with people in Pennsylvania, in Nebraska, in Louisville, Kentucky, with people in Australia and Canada all year. And we've been able to keep it going. So, okay, moving on. So what's the impact on the mom? Because, you know, you want to help the kid, you want the kid to get better, but let's face it, you know, it's not just the kid. So, well, the worst outcome that can happen for the mother is that she could be killed. And 3 women are still killed every month in the state of Michigan. That's a lot of people. And it's probably no different where you are. She could be injured. You know, we're just starting to look into head injuries of women who are abused, and emergency rooms are getting much better at trying to do those kinds of assessments, not just the physical, you know, whatever the wound is. You know, these moms, if they're still living with a violent partner, are very anxious, as well they should be, because they're being scared, terrified, and beaten up. They can be traumatized. They can have PTSD, and a lot of them have PTSD from the events. Low self-esteem, that's part of that controlling, coercion, psychological maltreatment. And also they may feel like it's their fault, like I can't get out of this. So they need a leg up, they need some help. Parenting stress. Okay, I don't know if any of you are parents. We got about 80 people here. I bet more than half of you, and I am too. This is the hardest job we do. Even on a great day with all the resources in the world, with kids who are happy and doing well, it's really hard. But at the end of the day, they just jump on your nerves. This is the hardest thing we do. For women and families with violence, this is incredibly stressful. Trying to keep it going, trying to do the right thing on top of, you know, all of these other areas of you know, stress for them. They're depressed. Most of these women, we had 100% were at least mildly and moderately depressed in the studies we've done, study after study after study now. And, you know, you gotta give people ways to manage things and help and get resources, etc. And then the depression is relieved. So they're not depressives where they have some biological depression problem. When you remove the woman from the circumstance that's depressing her, she gets better. Now, some people do have, you know, biologically based depressions. But again, the idea is, that, you know, toxic environment. Socially isolated, that's part of coercion and control of the abuser. So we got to get women reconnected. We've got to help them to be less isolated. Work disruption is another way. Stalking interrupts it, you know, demeaning the person. Sometimes abusive people don't want their partner to exceed them, to make more money than they do, or even to get information from people outside of their environment because it's threatening to them. So how are they typically doing? As I just said, all of these examples, more than half have diagnosed with PTSD, a third are injured, many die every month in every state. It's still going on. All are parenting under stress. So how can we help people with these many, many issues? We were asked, the same group of 221 people, to report on any injuries they had. So let's look at how much injury occurs. And these are people who had said they'd had physical fighting in a relationship within the last year. Here's what they said. 31% had a mild injury that required no intervention. So bruises, swelling, put ice on it, take care of it. 33% said they had a moderate injury, cuts, sprains, bite marks, things that were somewhat debilitating. But 20% had severe injury that required medical attention. So concussion, stabbing, broken bones. They're being injured. So we have to check for that. You know, women come in, we Even in shelters, I met a woman with twin babies in a shelter, one little kid in each arm. It was horrible to see what she'd gone through. And she said, but I'm not an abused woman. And a lot of people don't want to use that word. We use survivors. They're people who have been victimized. They are not people who want to say those words. And so we have to think of other ways to ask questions about how they might have been hurt, the kinds of things that happened to them that allow people to be able to tell their story. So when we're dealing with these moms, let's say in the moms program, and we want to help them too, you're going to help the kid even more with helping the mom. They're exhausted. I've had women just put their head down and fall asleep right in the middle of a session. They just have hit the wall. They need finances. They need resources. They need help. Most people in a violent relationship, this is one of the biggest reasons they can't get out. They don't have any place to go. They don't have enough money. They don't know what to do. Social support is limited, feeling socially disconnected from not just people, but from their community, from religious groups, from the things that might, make their life better, provide support. And keep in mind, they're trying to parent under stress, but they're parenting kids who have serious mental health problems. And, many of us may have kids who have mental health problems. But this double whammy, this idea that those two things are going on. A lot of the moms we work with too, we have whole sessions of your family of origin. What worked well when you were a kid and what would you change? And that is a big, long list. They often don't have good role models. Maybe their own parents, were in similar situations or had serious challenges and they weren't able to give enough to their kids. And these moms don't want to be that way. They want to be different. They want to do it better, like we all do. And most have been injured in some way in the last year. So how do we help them? Let's look at the moms program, and then we're going to take a break. So we're almost there for the first part. Introductions, again, we use a kind of similar format as with the moms as with the kids, but the moms program, we have topics that I write down one after another, but actually every session, all of these things are coming up. Trying to create a safe place for people to talk, a sense of confidentiality, sense of respect, and becoming a group together. You can't get 8 women together in a table, in a room, and not have them just jump in and keep talking and talking. It's great. They can't wait. Their kids are in a different room. It's like an hour off. How many of us would give anything when we had our little kids to get an hour off? It's gold. But they really need that time together. We address their fears and worries about their kids. So what's the great thing about your kid? How's your kid doing? But then, how's it working? What are you concerned about? So we make a long list of things. And in each of the session, we try to understand, well, how are kids doing and what might be happening because there's fighting in the family. And we look at every different age of kids and all the different ways that violence can affect their development. And that's important because some of these kids are parentified kids. Some parents just misunderstand the kid's behavior as this kid's being so mean to me. This kid doesn't like me. No, this kid is, acting out because they're scared. They need this, they need that. And it's much easier to handle distress in your kid when you know what's going on. How do you talk about family violence? Because you want to reduce the blame and shame. You want to reduce the kid's anxiety. And you can acknowledge, because kids, if you don't tell them what's happening, they're going to imagine all kinds of things. Like if only I'd made my bed, if only I didn't fight with my sister, and that's destroying their self-esteem. So how did you get parented when you were a kid? What would you do different? And then, this big issue with kids, how do you get them to not kill each other, particularly right before dinner? How do you get them to do their chores? How do you get kids to do what you want? Oh, I've tried that. I tried, time out one time. It never worked. Well, there are all kinds of strategies that people can talk about, and we could try on some new and different ideas. Maybe something could change. And once you teach and reinforce and support somebody in being successful in trying a new way of parenting, then they're going to keep doing it with each of the kids, with each of the issues. So it doesn't work all the time, but we can enhance the parenting for sure. And that will reduce the problems the mom has to deal with. So less stress all around the house. Safety planning for moms, super important. Stress management. How can you relax your body so that this stress in you doesn't kill you, doesn't make you sick, doesn't destroy, how you're acting and behaving? How can you learn how to calm down, to meditate, or just de-stress your body and help your kids to do it? There's a lot of research on this now. Here's a new one for people. How do you have fun with your kids when, the world is crumbling and your house is falling down? Well, it's another way of, kind of like money in the bank around mental health. So trying to boost up those things that we can do to make it better, even though it seems like, well, I'm just playing with my kid. This is gold. Kids love this. You can't do this enough. And then at the end, celebrating, what we've been through. In this group, moms become friends. They carry on and support each other. They are proud. Some are in different places. Some have already left an abuser. Some are still in it. Some are thinking about it, etc. And that kind of sharing and support that they give each other. It's not the group leader necessarily that we help, but it's gold and it really works. And we're going to find out at the end of the day if you can hang in there long enough to find out, well, what about it works and for whom does it work and how do we do? So we want to empower them, build up their parenting competence, and that's going to reduce their kids' troubles. Find a space to talk about things that they're scared of and worried about, getting connections to other people. We want to improve their parenting discipline and all of the things that we just talked about. And along the way, we will reduce their mental health problems. Their adjustment will be better. They'll be more connected. And we essentially want to restore the woman's rightful role and empower her as a mother and as a parent. And that's the whole point of the MOMS program. So we hope that by helping the mom, we can help the kid even more. But by helping the kid, getting a grip on issues, getting a little bit better control, that's going to help the mom's job as well. So, all right, that's a long way around the barn of what are the effects of IPV on children and on moms. And I think we should take a bit of a break, but I'll answer a couple more questions if we have them. And then we'll take maybe a 10-minute break and come back to the next part, which is what does trauma have to do with this? Who's talking about that? And why would anybody even think about traumatic stress with people in this situation? We'll see whether that's important or not. So have we got any questions, Diana?
We don't have any questions right now, so I think we're all ready for that break.
All right, so why don't we meet back? It'd be 10:30 your time. So that's about 8 minutes, and I will meet back here an hour later, which is my time in Michigan. All right, see you guys at 10:30. Thank you.